Commander Jake Mitchell stared at his computer screen in the quiet command center of Terra Station. The green text scrolled past his eyes, but one transmission made him stop cold. It was from a small farming colony called Vesper 7, way out on the edge of known space. The message seemed simple enough. The alien farmers there, called Carolians, were asking for help. Their crops were dying, and they needed medicine and food supplies. Nothing unusual about that. Colonies asked for help all the time. The big government group, called the Galactic Cooperative, had already marked it as a routine mission. They planned to send one cargo ship with basic supplies, but Jake knew better. He had been studying old military files for years, reading about wars that happened long before most people were born. The details in this message, the way the plants were dying, the strange readings in the air, even the timing of when it all started matched something terrible from the past. Jake's hands moved quickly across his keyboard as he pulled up classified documents. His heart started beating faster as he found what he was looking for. This wasn't just crop failure. This was the beginning of something much worse. Something that could kill every living thing on that planet. Lieutenant Davis, Jake called out to his communications officer. Amy Davis looked up from her station, surprised by the urgency in his voice. Yes, sir. Get me Admiral Brooks right now. Use the emergency channel. Tell her we have a Code Scarlet situation. Davis had never heard that code before, but she could tell from Jake's expression that it was serious. Very serious. Her fingers flew over the controls as she established the connection to Admiral Rebecca Brooks, who was stationed 3-star systems away. While Davis worked on the communication link, Jake continued reading the files. The more he learned, the more worried he became. This same pattern had happened before, hundreds of years ago. Entire worlds had died. Billions of people and aliens had been killed by something that started exactly like what was happening on Vesper-7. Meanwhile, in a gleaming office building on Centauri Station, bureaucrats were having a very different conversation. They sat around a polished table, discussing the Vesper 7 request like it was just another item on their daily checklist. Standard humanitarian mission, one official said, barely looking up from his tablet. Send the usual supplies. Should be handled within a week. They had no idea what was really happening. The Galactic Cooperative was good at many things, but they moved slowly. They followed rules and procedures. They didn't like to take risks or spend more money than necessary. To them, Vesper 7 was just another colony that needed basic help, but Admiral Rebecca Brooks was not like the bureaucrats. When Jake's emergency message reached her flagship, the USS Resolve, she didn't hesitate for even a second. She had worked with Jake before and trusted his judgment completely. All ships, prepare for immediate deployment, she announced over the ship's communication system. We're going to Vesper 7, and we're going in force. Her fleet was impressive, 16 ships of different sizes and purposes. There were warships with heavy weapons, medical ships with the best doctors and equipment, science vessels with laboratories, and support ships carrying everything an army might need. Each ship was crewed by humans who had trained for years to handle the most dangerous situations in space. The other captains didn't question Brooks' orders. They knew that when she moved this fast, something big was happening, within hours. All 16 ships were calculating their jump routes too. Vesper 7, the massive engines hummed to life as they prepared to cross the vast distances between stars. Back on Centauri Station, the bureaucrats were still planning to send their single cargo ship sometime next week. The moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Vesper 7, Captain Tom Anderson knew they were in trouble. His science ship, the USS Discovery, immediately began scanning the planet below. What his instruments showed made his stomach drop. Anderson had been studying alien biology for 15 years. He had seen plagues, crop diseases, and natural disasters on dozens of worlds. But this was different. This was deliberate. The readings coming from the planet's surface told a story that chilled him to the bone. "Get me a direct line to Admiral Brooks," Anderson told his communications officer. "Priority 1. Down on the planet, the Corallian farmers were dying, not just from hunger, but from breathing air that was slowly changing into something that would kill them. The crops weren't just failing, they were being replaced by something else entirely. Strange, twisted plants that looked nothing like anything that should grow on Vesper 7 were spreading across the farmlands like a green carpet of death." Dr. Lisa Parker, the fleet's top scientist, worked frantically in her laboratory aboard the flagship. She had collected samples of the alien plants and was studying them under powerful microscopes. What she found confirmed everyone's worst fears. "Admiral," she said over the communication system, her voice tight with worry, "this isn't a natural disease. These plants are engineered. They're designed to change the planet's atmosphere and soil. They're turning Vesper 7 into a world that can't support the colonists." Admiral Brooks stood on the bridge of the USS Resolve, looking down at the planet through the massive viewing windows. She could see the brown patches spreading across what used to be green farmland. "How much time do we have, Doctor?" 72 hours, Parker replied grimly. "After that, the air itself will become poison to anyone who breathes oxygen. The colonists will suffocate in their own homes." Brooks felt a cold anger building in her chest. He had seen bioweapons before, during her years fighting in the Outer Rim conflicts, but using them against innocent farmers and their families was beyond cruel. It was genocide disguised as crop failure. Nearby, floating in orbit, like a tiny dot next to the massive human fleet, was the Galactic Cooperative's aid ship. The Benevolent Dawn was a cargo vessel about the size of a human destroyer, carrying food rations, basic medical supplies, and a small team of relief workers. Captain Voss, a Corallian who commanded the cooperative ship, kept sending confused messages to the human fleet. He couldn't understand why the humans had brought 16 warships to help with what everyone thought was a simple farming problem. "Admiral Brooks," Voss's translator-filtered voice came through the communication system. "I appreciate your concern for my people, but surely this level of military presence is unnecessary. We only need food and medicine." Brooks almost felt sorry for him. Voss was a good being trying to help his people, but he had no idea what they were really facing. The Galactic Cooperative moved slowly and carefully. They didn't like to assume the worst about any situation. That cautious approach worked well for trade disputes and diplomatic problems, but it was deadly when dealing with bioweapons. "Colonel Thompson," Brooks called to her ground forces commander, "begin immediate deployment. I want atmospheric processors on the surface within 6 hours." Colonel Rick Thompson had been preparing for this moment since they first received Jake Mitchell's emergency message. His Marines were already loading into transport ships, carrying equipment that most species had never seen before. These weren't just soldiers, they were specialists, trained to fight wars that others couldn't even imagine. The atmospheric processors were massive machines designed to clean poisoned air and restore breathable atmosphere to dead worlds. Most galactic governments considered them experimental technology, too expensive and complex to deploy except in extreme emergencies. But humans had been building and improving them for decades, just in case they were ever needed. As Thompson's Marines established landing zones around the Corallian settlements, they weren't just setting up medical camps and food distribution centers. They were building defensive positions, installing sensor networks, and preparing for a battle that the rest of the galaxy didn't even know was coming. The colonists watched in amazement as human soldiers worked alongside their doctors and engineers, turning their dying world into something that looked more like a military base than a relief operation. The alarm that pierced through the USS Resolve's bridge was unlike anything the crew had heard in years. Lieutenant Commander Ana Rodriguez sat at her tactical station, watching as her screens filled with warnings and flashing red indicators. Her hands moved quickly across the controls as she tried to make sense of what her long-range sensors were detecting. "Admiral," Rodriguez called out, her voice cutting through the sudden tension on the bridge. "I'm reading massive spatial distortions at the edge of the system. Something big is coming out of hyperspace." Admiral Brooks moved to stand behind Rodriguez's station, studying the data streaming across the monitors. She had been expecting this moment, but seeing it happen still sent a chill down her spine. The patterns on the screen matched exactly what she had been dreading. "How many ships?" Brooks asked, though she already suspected the answer would be bad news. Rodriguez's fingers danced over her instruments as she refined the sensor readings. The distortions were getting stronger, which meant whatever was coming was getting closer to breaking through into normal space. 12 vessels, Admiral. They're big, much larger than anything in our fleet. The energy signatures are ... unusual. I've never seen anything quite like this before." But Admiral Brooks had seen these signatures before, in classified military databases that only a few humans had access to. She knew exactly what was heading toward Vesper 7, and it wasn't good news for anyone in the system. "Time to emergence?" she asked. "Approximately 6 hours, Admiral." Brooks nodded grimly and walked to the center of the bridge. She pressed a button that opened communication channels to every ship in her fleet, as well as to the Galactic Cooperative vessels still floating nearby. "All hands, this is Admiral Brooks. What we feared has come to pass. We are about to face an enemy that the galaxy believed was extinct. The Devok have returned." Throughout the human fleet, crew members stopped what they were doing to listen. Many of them had never heard of the Devok, but the older officers and the scientists knew the stories. They were tales of horror from humanity's early days in space, stories of entire worlds stripped bare of life, of civilizations that simply vanished without explanation. Dr. James Listen had been just a young archaeologist 30 years ago, when he made the discovery that changed everything. While exploring ancient ruins on a dead world called Kepler 4 for 2b, he had found evidence of what had really killed the planet's inhabitants. It wasn't war or natural disaster. It was systematic extermination by bioweapons so advanced that they could reshape entire ecosystems. Wilson had spent years decoding the alien technology, learning how it worked and why it was so effective. The beings who created these weapons called themselves the Devok, and they had a simple philosophy. Any world worth having was worth taking completely. They didn't want to share planets with other species. They wanted to replace them entirely. The galaxy's major governments had dismissed Wilson's findings as ancient history. The Devok were gone, they said. Dead for thousands of years. There was no point in worrying about extinct threats, when there were plenty of current problems to solve. But humans had a different approach. They studied the data Wilson had collected. They built weapons designed to fight Devok technology. They created protocols and strategies for battles that might never happen. Other species called it paranoid. Humans called it prepared. Captain David Rodriguez commanded the destroyer USS Vigilant, one of the newer ships in the fleet. His vessel had been specifically designed with anti-Devok capabilities, though he had never expected to use them in actual combat. Now, as he received Admiral Brooks' orders, he began activating systems that had only existed in simulations and training exercises. Computer, load, combat protocol, Nightmare 7. Rodriguez ordered his ship's artificial intelligence. Protocol. Loaded, Captain. All weapon systems are configured for Devok engagement patterns. Shall I begin predictive modeling? Do it. I want to know their likely attack formations before they even finish emerging from hyperspace. The Vigilance AI had been fed decades of data about Devok tactics, gathered from archaeological sites and ancient battle records. The patterns were clear. The Devok were arrogant and predictable. They expected their bioweapons to do most of the work for them, leaving behind weakened and dying populations that couldn't fight back. But this time was different. This time, they would find a human fleet waiting for them, armed with weapons, specifically designed to turn their own tactics against them. The Devok expected to arrive at a dead world, ready for harvest. Instead, they were about to discover why humans had spent 30 years preparing for this exact moment. The space around Vesper 7 suddenly filled with the most terrifying sight the galaxy had seen in centuries. 12 massive Devok ships materialized out of hyperspace, each one the size of a small city. These weren't the clean metal vessels that most civilizations built. They were living things, pulsing and writhing like enormous sea creatures. Made of dark organic matter, the Devok harvesters moved in perfect synchronization, arranging themselves in a formation that had once meant certain death for any world unlucky enough to see it. Biocannons sprouted from their hulls like thorns, already beginning to charge with the sickly green energy that could poison entire atmospheres from orbit. But something was wrong. The Devok commanders, floating in their fluid-filled command chambers, studied their tactical displays with growing confusion. They had expected to find a dying world below them, with perhaps a few desperate survivors huddled in failing shelters. Instead, their sensors showed a fully armed human fleet waiting in what looked like a defensive formation around the planet. Admiral Brooks stood calmly on the bridge of the USS Resolve, watching the alien ships arrange themselves exactly as her strategists had predicted they would. The Devok were following patterns that hadn't changed in thousands of years. They were predictable, arrogant, and about to learn a very painful lesson about human military doctrine. All ships, Brooks said into her communicator, execute Operation Mousetrap. What the Devok thought was a defensive formation suddenly revealed its true purpose. The human ships that had appeared to be protecting the planet were actually positioned to create a perfect killing field. Every angle of escape had been calculated and blocked. The moment the Devok began their attack, they would find themselves surrounded. Captain Michelle Roberts commanded the carrier USS Defiance, the largest ship in the human fleet. Her vessel carried over 200 fighter craft, each one piloted by some of the best combat pilots humanity had ever produced. As the Devok ships began moving toward the planet, Roberts gave the order that started the battle. All squadrons, launch immediately. Hit them while they're still getting organized. The space around Vesper 7 suddenly swarmed with tiny human fighters, moving so fast that the Devok targeting systems couldn't lock onto them. These weren't ordinary space fighters. They had been specially modified with weapons designed to exploit weaknesses in Devok. Bio-Ships. Commander Tyler Jackson had spent months preparing for this moment. His engineering teams had worked around the clock to modify every weapon in the human fleet. Traditional energy weapons were effective against metal ships, but bioships required a different approach. Jackson's people had developed ammunition that was part explosive, part biological agent bullets that could make the living Devok vessels literally allergic to themselves. The first human torpedoes struck the lead Devok harvester, and the results were immediate and devastating. Instead of simply punching holes in the ship's hull, the weapons began spreading through its organic structure like an infection. The massive vessel started convulsing, its biocannons misfiring as its own immune system turned against it. But the real genius of the human strategy was happening down on the planet's surface. Dr. Kevin Brown had been working with samples of the Devok bioweapon since the fleet first arrived. While the Devok thought their biological attack was weakening the planet's defenses, Brown had actually been using it as raw material for something much more dangerous. The same weapon that was supposed to make the planet uninhabitable for oxygen-breathing species had been reverse-engineered into a vaccine. Not only were the Corellian colonists now immune to the bioweapon, but Brown had created something even more impressive, an airborne agent that was specifically lethal to Devok physiology. As the space battle raged overhead, Brown's medical teams were releasing clouds of invisible death into the atmosphere. Any Devok ground forces that tried to land would find the very air they breathed turned into poison. The battle lasted less than 4 hours. One by one, the massive Divak harvesters began breaking apart, their organic hulls unable to cope with weapons specifically designed to target their biological systems. The aliens who had terrorized the galaxy for millennia found themselves completely outmatched by a species they had never encountered before. When the last Devok ship finally exploded, in a burst of green flame, the space around Vesper 7 was filled with expanding clouds of debris. Down on the planet, Corellian colonists emerged from their shelters to see human transport ships landing in their fields. But these weren't conquerors coming to claim a victory. They were neighbors who had brought medical supplies, food, and engineers to help rebuild what the bioweapons had damaged. The human Marines who stepped off the ships came not with weapons drawn, but with their hands extended in friendship. 6 months after the Battle of Vesper 7, the entire galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. The Galactic Cooperative's massive bureaucracy had been forced to completely rewrite their emergency response procedures. What used to be a simple form requesting basic aid had become a complex analysis system designed to identify real threats, hidden behind seemingly innocent requests for help. Admiral Jessica Thompson sat in her office at Cooperative Headquarters, putting the finishing touches on the most important military document written in decades. Her after-action report on the Devok incident was already being called the Thompson Doctrine by military strategists across known space. Thompson had taken over fleet operations after Admiral Brooks retired to become the head of the new Xenological Threat Assessment Division. Brooks had earned that quiet desk job after saving not just Vesper 7, but potentially dozens of other worlds that the Devok had been preparing to attack. Computer, finalize report, and distribute to all military academies, Thompson said as she approved the final version of her document. Within hours, every military school in the galaxy received a copy of Thompson's detailed analysis. The report became required reading for anyone studying interstellar warfare. Young cadets from hundreds of different species learned how a small human fleet had defeated an enemy that had once terrorized the entire galaxy. But the most important lessons weren't about tactics or weapons technology. They were about preparation, pattern recognition, and the human tendency to plan for problems that might never happen. Other species called it paranoia. Humans called it Tuesday. Down on Vesper 7, the Corellian colonists had built something that no one expected. In the center of their main settlement, where the worst of the bioweapon damage had occurred, they erected a simple stone monument. The inscription was written in both Corellian script and human English, but the message was universal. To those who brought not what we asked for, but what we needed, the memorial read. Below that, in smaller text, was a list of every human who had participated in the battle, from Admiral Brooks down to the lowest-ranking Marine who had helped distribute medical supplies. The Corellians hadn't asked for a military fleet. They had asked for food and medicine. But the humans had understood something that the galaxy's bureaucrats missed. Sometimes, what people ask for isn't what they actually need. Captain Robert Martinez now commanded something that had never existed before in galactic history, a joint task force that combined cooperative resources with human military doctrine. The politicians called it the Cooperative Human Joint Task Force. The pirates and raiders who were starting to encounter it had other names for it, most of which couldn't be printed in official reports. Martinez was reviewing the day's intelligence reports when his communications officer approached his desk with a worried expression. "Sir, we've received a distress call from the Outer Rim territories. Trade convoy is reporting pirate attacks along the Kepler route. They're requesting a patrol ship to escort future shipments." On the surface, it was exactly the kind of routine request that the cooperative had been handling for centuries. Pirates were a constant problem in the poorly patrolled outer systems, and merchant convoys regularly asked for military escorts. Martinez studied the report for a moment, then smiled. It was the kind of smile that had been making pirates very nervous for the past 6 months. "Signal Admiral Patterson's Fifth Fleet," Martinez ordered. "Tell them we have a piracy situation that requires their immediate attention." His communications officer looked confused. The Fifth Fleet was a massive formation of warships designed to fight major space battles, not chase down a few pirates with stolen cargo haulers. "Sir, regulations suggest a single patrol cruiser would be sufficient for a piracy incident." Martinez chuckled. "Officer, you're still thinking like the old cooperative. We don't send what's sufficient anymore. We send what will solve the problem permanently." 3 days later, the pirates operating along the Kepler route got the surprise of their lives when they tried to ambush what they thought was an undefended merchant convoy. Instead of the usual lightly armed escort ship, they found themselves facing a full human battle fleet with orders to clean up the entire region. The pirate leaders who survived the encounter spread the word quickly through the criminal underground. The Outer Rim wasn't safe for raiders anymore. The humans didn't just protect individual convoys, they eliminated entire pirate networks. Word traveled fast through both legal and illegal channels. When humans offered to help with a problem, they didn't just address the immediate symptom. They identified the root cause and eliminated it completely. It was an approach that made some politicians nervous, but made ordinary citizens sleep much better at night. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from the humans. Sometimes the best way to provide aid wasn't to give people exactly what they asked for. Sometimes it was better to give them what would actually fix their problems forever. And somehow, in the months following Vesper 7, space had become a much safer place for honest people trying to make a living among the stars.